Okay, now it's time to talk about recording vocals. There isn't too much to talk about in this regard because there aren't a lot of standard practices. In terms of microphone choice, there's not a lot of standard practices. Some singers will sound great with a really expensive Neumann. Some sound really good with an SM57. I've done some rock sessions where actually it was the singer with headphones on screaming into the SM57 and it sounded killer. I've done other sessions with really great singers singing through more expensive mics, and that sounds good. Now, one thing, having a good quality mic preamp, and even with mic preamps and vocals, for certain people like an Avalon sounds great. For certain people, a Millennia sounds great. For me, I'm a Neve guy, as I've probably said before. When I got this and this particular microphone, this is a really nice microphone, I think, for a starter point, for inexpensive condensers. This is a Neumann TLM 103. Now, other mics that have come out recently that sound really nice. This is a Rode NTK, very inexpensive, and you might be thinking, why does the guy have the bag on the mic? Well, I normally have a bag on this mic as well when I'm not using it, and the reason is it keeps all the dust off the capsule. Now, with a microphone like this, if you look in here, you could see the capsule, the same with that mic. So dust can fall out of the air, through that screen and onto the capsule, and after a very short amount of time, actually, it could start to lose its definition or its detail. So with nicer condenser mics like this, put a plastic bag on it, and it'll make them last a much longer time and make them sound really good. Now, once again, preamp's very important, a good cable, unless you're going for a certain sound. So really, there's no limitations here with microphones. Some people, an $8,000 Telefunken 251 sounds really nice. Other people, once again, an SM57 or some like little crummy mic. So with vocals, I mean, the difficult thing about vocals is that a band's character, put that down, band's character is really mostly defined by the sound of the vocalist. Okay, you take any of the great vocalists out there away from the band, and it's going to be a different band. So it is very important to get a good vocal tone. One thing when you're recording a vocal that I've seen a lot of people do wrong is they get very close to the microphone. And you start to get all these sibilances, high S's and T's and things like that, and plosives. Whenever you say a P, it'll go P, and you get that big boomy sound. If you stay at least 12 inches from the microphone, you'll get a lot more natural sound. Also in my room, I specifically designed this room for one, mixing and also vocal recording because I'm a vocalist. Not the greatest vocalist in the world, but I'm a vocalist. And I've actually been able to get some really great tones because I padded around where the vocal area is. So these walls, see, they're soft. There's actually insulation behind here that's about this thick underneath this fabric. Now, a lot of vocal tracking sessions I've seen, especially in studios where it's a hardwood floor and a more ambient room, they'll bring in two gobos. And gobos are basically big roll-away padded surfaces that absorb sound. We're going to talk about absorption and acoustics in this next coming section here, or actually two sections from now, called The Big Secret. We're going to talk about acoustics quite a bit in that section. Definitely watch that. I know I've said it before, very important section. Either way, back to vocal tracking. If you have a hardwood floor, sometimes it's a great idea to throw carpet down because you won't get a reflection off the floor, which can often put this kind of brittle harshness in the quality. A lot of times, just putting a carpet down will take care of it. And a lot of times in recording sessions I've been in with really, really great vocalists, they'll bring two gobos in on each side of the singer, sometimes in front, just to make a real dead boxed-in sound. That's what I did with this room, actually, in the area where I mainly sing. On the wall behind the camera, in this case, it's a padded wall just like this. And the ceiling absorbs as well. And I have a carpet on the floor. So I can get really good vocal tones in here. One thing that vocalists tend to do wrong, one, they get too close to the mic, as I was talking about earlier. When sections come up where they want it to be more exciting, they yell and their volume goes through the roof. Really good singers have very even volume. Even when they do loud, distorted stuff, very even volume. The hardest thing you're going to have when you're tracking vocals is finding a microphone that defines the character of the singer. And that's a very personal thing. Big recording sessions, they'll normally put up like 10 or 20 mics and have the singer go through each one until they find a mic where it's like, ah, that's really nice. Expense has nothing to do with it when you're picking a vocal mic. So that's really the main things I have to say about vocals. Let's show you a little bit about processing vocals and show you some of the things you could do, whether you're using plugins or an outboard preamp. Now, one thing that's kind of handy, the high-pass filter. On this particular preamp, there's a great high-pass filter, and I usually roll the vocals off around 40 cycles. Anything below that you just don't need, and it'll help get rid of some of those plosives, those big low-end things that make your woofers just shake. Other than that, some people use a little bit of a limiter, and you can use a compressor when you're tracking, but digital environments these days have huge noise floors or signal-to-noise ratios. So you can track without a compressor and compress after the fact and get some really good results. Let's show you a few things in Pro Tools that you can do to help vocal sound. So we're back here in Pro Tools, and let's take a look at some things you could do to vocals, some more typical techniques that we can do to help the sound of vocals. Now, once again, in vocal recording, there really aren't any standards, but some things that have become really popular in the vocal domain is that once you've tracked a vocal, sometimes you'll have pitch problems. And a lot of people don't want to go in and retrack a vocal with a little bit of a pitch problem because the character is great. And that's why you have plugins like Pitch Doctor or also Auto-Tune by Antares. Pitch Doctor here is by Wave Mechanics, but the Auto-Tune plugin by Antares is really, really popular as well, and both are really, really great plugins. You can either use them just to sharpen an entire vocal if a vocalist sings everything a little bit flat, or you can go into auto mode and have it automatically correct for pitch problems. Once again though, use your ears when you're doing this and make sure you don't just level out the entire vocal and make it perfect, because that can sound pretty boring. Imperfections can give a vocal character. Most of the time you'll use some kind of compression on a vocal, even though really good singers need less and less compression. And one thing, as I mentioned earlier, I like tracking into Digital Audio Workstation because of the amount of headroom and then compressing afterwards. The Renaissance compressor by Waves I found to be a really great compressor. Or if you're using an outboard piece of gear, like the 1176, this is also very popular. Now, one thing, when you're mixing, a lot of times it's a good idea to mix the vocal pretty early on in the game, because the vocal really defines the sound of a song. So we have a vocal here with a drum track.
Con that man, take his land, but keep it off the news. Young boy raised on television, brought a gun to school.
Now, a couple things I did with this particular vocal is, one, I used a delay. And if you're using a delay on a vocal, you can use a delay for a lot of things. You can either use it to do a big spacey effect like we did here, and this is an extra long delay. And I also fed in the tempo of this particular session, and basically this calculated out a quarter note delay for me, which is around 678 milliseconds. Now in this particular case, actually, if you hit quarter note here and you come up with a quarter note delay, one thing that it'll do, it'll help the delay taps in the vocal match up with the beats of the song to reinforce the rhythm of the song. But in the case of this particular song, I don't know, it just sounded, because of the way the vocal was dragged back a little bit, I tightened up the delay time just to kind of have the delay taps land more on the beat. The feedback, the amount of delay taps you use, once again, this is really preferential. Now, other things you can do with delay taps, you can also double the vocal up by doing a real tight delay. That'll give you this kind of feel.
Con that man, take his land, but keep it off the news.
You might want to use a little less if you're doing that as well.
Con that man, take his land, but keep it off the news.
Now also I'm using a reverb on this vocal as well, which is really typical. This is all preferential though. If you want to use a reverb or not, or if you want to use a delay tap or not, once again, this is all stuff that you can do that's very typical, and you'll find a lot of people using these techniques. But, you know, through the late 90s, actually, you heard of a lot of very dry vocals with no effects at all. So really, whatever you do, you're really trying to reinforce the message of the song. I like mixing the vocals, sometimes with the drums active, sometimes alone, because in a rock song, the primary elements in that tune are going to be the vocals and the drums, and then you would mix in the guitars, the bass, and the other elements after that to make sure that they don't crowd the two main elements of the song, in this case being the vocals and the drums. Now, if the guitar, like if it's a guitar-oriented band and you want the guitars to be really forward, you should mix those early on as well. So another really cool plugin to use is by Antares as well, and this plugin is called Mic Modeler. And what you can do with Mic Modeler is you can say, hey, I use this type of mic, but I want it to sound like this type of mic. And on the left side of the plugin,
you would select the mic that you used, and on the right side, you would select the mic that you want it to sound like. This is a really great plugin, especially for people who don't have huge libraries or vaults of very expensive microphones to choose from. It really does what it claims and can really help you find that ultimate microphone for a given vocal, for a given song as well. So if you don't want to go out and spend tens of thousands of dollars on different microphones, if you start with a good condenser mic, you can get really great results by using Mic Modeler. Now another thing back here in Pro Tools, for instance, we're looking at a vocal track here, and a lot of times with different parts of a vocal, like for instance, often where a singer has to sing higher notes, he or she will sing louder. And in this particular vocal isn't too bad. It's pretty good, but you could see there are definitely parts where it's louder and quieter. So for instance, right there, if I wanted this part of the song to be louder, what I could do is go to my volume graph here and simply take my trim tool and just trim that up a few dB to make it louder. This is a good idea, especially with louder parts, to make them quieter, because then you're not going to hit your compressor really hard and just compress the heck out of louder parts of a vocal track. So using automation is a really, really good idea on vocal tracks.
So there's a couple little tricks about things you can do with vocals in Pro Tools. Once again, there is no one mic to start with. SM57 sometimes are great, TLM103s are great. Really expensive Neumann U67s, I've tracked with one of those. It's a beautiful sounding microphone. They cost anywhere from $4,000 to $7,000. If you don't have that kind of budget, there are some really good condenser mics. Now there's also software like I was showing you, the Antares Auto-Tune for fixing pitch correction, or you can use the Wave Mechanics plugin. There's also the Antares plugin that does mic modeling, so you can try different microphones out just by using one mic and flipping through presets. So once again, there's not a lot of standards in vocals. It's a very difficult thing to get good vocal recording. There's a definite art to that and been a lot of articles written on it. But get in there, start recording stuff, change things up, try different microphones, and before you know it, you'll start to get tones that you're liking. Let's move on now. We're going to talk a little bit about mixing and some of the features that you can go through in mixing to make your song sound better.